The words to which I should like to call your attention this evening are to be found in the book of the Acts of the Apostles, in the 8th chapter, and reading from verse 26 to verse 31. And the angel of the Lord spake unto Philip, saying, Arise, and go toward the south, unto the way that goeth down from Jerusalem unto Gaza, which is desert. And he arose and went. And behold, a man of Ethiopia, an eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had the charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem for to worship, was returning, and sitting in his chariot, read Isaiah the prophet. Then the Spirit said unto Philip, Go near, and join thyself to this chariot. And Philip ran thither to him, and heard him read the prophet Isaiah, and said, Understandest thou what thou readest? And he said, How can I, except some men should guide me? And he desired Philip that he would come up and sit with him. And the story goes on to tell us how Philip found that he was reading at a particular place in the book of the prophet Isaiah. And then Philip expounded it and other scriptures to him. And the men, as the result of this exposition, believed the truth. So that the end of the story, as it is given here, is this. And when they were come up out of the water, for he'd asked to be baptized, and Philip had baptized him, when they were come up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught away Philip, that the eunuch saw him no more. And he, the eunuch, went on his way rejoicing. Now, this is one of these great New Testament stories. The Bible, amongst other things, has its incomparable stories. And this is one of these great and marvelous and wonderful stories. It's a story, of course, which shows us the essential nature of the Christian message, of what it does, what it sets out to do, and how it does it. It shows us, therefore, the character of the Christian life and the effect that becoming Christian has upon any individual or any group of individuals in the world. And the thing, of course, that strikes us at once is the great and marvelous change that took place in this man's entire circumstances. From being a miserable and a very unhappy man, he became a man who was filled with the spirit of rejoicing and went on his way rejoicing. Now, this is the great thing that is established by this famous story. It reminds us at once, you see, that the Christian life is something profound, and that when a man becomes a Christian, the truth about him is not simply that he's a little bit better than he was before, or that he's been modified somewhat, or that he's been improved a little, or that he's added something extra on to what he'd got before. It just shows us that those ideas of what it is to be a Christian are totally and completely inadequate. What it does is to change a man completely. And that is why the Bible talks about regeneration or rebirth or being created anew. No other term is adequate to describe this great and wonderful change that takes place in a man when he becomes a Christian. Well, now, that's the sort of thing that we've got in this story. And thank God we've got it, for we're living in an age when there are strange and curious notions current with regard to what Christianity is, with regard to what it means to be a Christian. Some seem to have the impression that it's mainly a question of backing Britain. At least they seem to be preaching on that theme today, as if that were Christianity. But here, you see, we are given the true, the genuine, and the real thing. And thank God, I say, that we have such records which we can consider together. Now, we ought to thank God that he ever caused his servant Luke to write this book and to give us details such as this. Has it ever occurred to you to ask that question? Why have you got a story like this? Why do they take the trouble to enter into all these details? Well, you see, this is the wisdom of God. There were misunderstandings current at the very beginning with regard to Christianity, and they've increased since then. So God not merely gives us the truth in the form of doctrine or of teaching, he gives us these examples and practical illustrations so that we are left without any excuse at all. We are given the story of how it happened to one particular man like this. You see, the Bible doesn't just say that if a man believes in Christ, he becomes a Christian. We know from practice and from experience that there are difficulties and obstacles and many things that trouble us. Well, thank God, here we are given a case like this, and we can follow it from step to step and stage to stage and discover exactly what it is. Now, here I say we are dealing with one particular case. And it is right that we should do so. But remember, all cases are not identical. What I mean by that is this. There are different types of persons, and they become Christians in detail in different ways. Different types of temperament, different backgrounds, different abilities. There are these extraordinary differences. But, and this is the thing I really want to emphasize, in the great essential centralities, they're all the same. I'm simply making this point for this reason, that I've known people to be in trouble sometimes with regard to these matters because they haven't had exactly the experience of somebody else whom they knew. I once knew a Christian father who was a real hindrance to his own son because he wasn't satisfied that his son was a Christian at all because his son hadn't had in detail the experience he'd had. And he said to me on one occasion when I was talking to him to try to get him to cease hindering his own son, he said, you know, he hasn't had the Damascus Road experience. I said, why should he have it? I said, that's not the test. We are not concerned so much as to how a man becomes a Christian as to whether he is a Christian. That's the question. And so you will find that while there are these particular differences in the details of how it happens to a man, how it comes to him, there are certain things that are absolutes and are always present, and those are the things that really matter for us. Nevertheless, it is interesting to observe these differences, because as you do so, you will find that you in particular are helped by one rather than by another. And that is why God has provided these different types for us, in order that somewhere or another, and somehow or another, taking them all together, we're all covered, and we're all helped even in connection with the details. So I'm calling attention to this for these great reasons, that we may examine ourselves in the light of this, that we may know exactly whether the essentials are true of us, not so much the details as the great essentials. These things are written for our instruction. We need to examine ourselves. Every man who thinks he's a Christian is not a Christian. There are strange ideas, as I say, as to what makes a man a Christian. So we've got to examine ourselves. We've got to make sure this is the most vital thing in the whole of life. This is the thing that determines not only how we live in this world, but how we die and how we're going to spend that unknown eternity. We can't afford to take risks. Let's examine ourselves in the light of the teaching that we find here in connection with this particular man. Now here we've got, I say, a very definite type. If you like, you can call him the intellectual type, the moral type, the religious type of person. That's what we are going to look at. So that as we study the case of this man and his conversion, of how he became a Christian, in addition to discovering these great essentials, as I call them, we shall incidentally be discovering something else. And this is the thing that I want to emphasize in particular tonight. This is too great a case to deal with in one night. But I want to deal with this one particular thing. Here is a case above every other, in a sense, that shows us the difference between being religious and being Christian. Now, that's a very vital distinction. In many ways, the greatest enemy of Christianity is religion. I don't care what type of religion it is. It was the greatest obstacle in our Lord's own time His greatest antagonists were the religious people, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the doctors of the law. These were the people who opposed the apostles. This has ever been throughout the centuries the great trouble. So there is nothing more vital than that we should know beyond any doubt or peradventure this evening as to whether we are just religious or whether we are truly Christian. This is the most vital thing we can ever discover about ourselves. Very well. This man's going to help us to do so. Now, what do we find here? Well, there is one general point I want to make before I come to the details of this man's character. Can you read a story like this without being impressed by the greatness of life? What a tremendous thing life is. Look at this man, great men. There he is going home in the condition I'm going to unfold to you. And yet, everything changes. What a tremendous thing life is. What issues are involved. What a problem life is. Now this man shows us all that quite clearly, and what a serious thing life is. And what glorious possibilities there are in life. I was dealing with this in introducing this whole subject last Sunday evening, you remember. The angel suddenly appearing and dealing with Philip. The man at the most unexpected moment in the most unexpected place, suddenly being confronted by the very teacher he needs, and the great and glorious transformation in the whole of his life. Oh, what a tremendous thing life is. The greatest tragedy, I believe, at this moment in this world is the failure of so many people to realize the greatness of life. Just think how the average person is spending this very evening. What are they doing? Don't you see the triviality of it all? The superficiality that is so characteristic of it all. You see, the trouble is not only that they're not Christian, but they don't realize what a tremendous thing life is. It's a joke. It's something you can dismiss with a sneer. Something you can be sarcastic and clever about. What a debased view of life. No, if I were not a Christian at all, I should protest against this. Life's not a joke. Not something to be dismissed with a quip or a sneer or a bit of cleverness. If this story does nothing else, it will enable us to look at a great man who realized what a tremendous thing life is and what a great thing it is to live and the whole problem of existence. It's here on the very surface. And you see, this is the note that is so characteristic of the Bible from beginning to end. There is no book in the world that gives such an impression of the bigness and the profundity of life as this book of God. And that's why we must read it and pay attention to it and try together to understand it. Very well, here it is. Well, now let's begin to look at the details. Let's look at this man. There he is there in that chariot. What sort of man was he? Well, I say the first thing that strikes us about him is that he's obviously a man in a great position. He's riding in a chariot, perhaps surrounded by other chariots, certainly surrounded by a number of servants, because he was a very great man, and he was in a very great position. He was a man, we are told, of great authority under this queen of the Ethiopians, and he had charge of all her treasure. Now, you know, in those ancient courts, there were these various courtiers, and there was this type of men that generally was given this highest position, kind of chancellor of the exchequer, if you like, or even more important than that in those days. To him had been entrusted this great charge in connection with that particular kingdom. You're immediately impressed by the fact, therefore, that you're dealing with a very big man and a very great man and a very important man. But that, of course, tells us other things about him at once. And the other thing is that he was obviously a very able man. You didn't get into such a position unless you'd got ability. He gives further proof of his ability by the fact that he's able to read. Everybody couldn't read then. But here's a man who even in those days was able to read. He's an able man, an intelligent man, an educated man. He's a man quite out of the ordinary in the gifts and the propensities and the faculties that he possesses. In addition to that, it is quite clear that he is a moral man, a man of good character. No man was ever put into this position unless he was a reliable character, a man of upright, moral, straight dealings, a man who could be trusted. He was handling great wealth, and he was put into that position because it was known that he was the sort of man whom you could trust. His character was well known, and he was well known as a man of wisdom, judgment, balance, utter honesty, absolute reliability. Now there he is. All that is quite clear to him in just these little glimpses that we're given here in this kind of cameo that Luke paints to such perfection. But you've got to search for these things and see them, realize the sort of men you're dealing with. Well, now, he was that sort of man, and in this position, obviously, he was living the kind of life that people of this type and of this character and of this position lived in the courts in those ancient days. You've read about these in history books, you've read about them in storybooks, you've read about, seen them perhaps on the television, the life of a typical ancient court in the first century. It had its interests, it had its kind of culture, it had its drinking and its dancing and its feasting and all these things, the typical life of a court. A court today, a court then. Even more magnificence than now. Well, now, here is a man who, there he is, that's the kind of man you're looking at. But you see, there are so many things that I can tell you about this man. And the first thing I have to tell you about him is that he was dissatisfied with all that. He was unhappy. He'd got this ability and he knew it. Men of ability know they've got it. It's a part of their ability to know it, and he knew it, and his position told him that. And yet, you see, with all his ambition and his high position and his ability and all these things, this man was unhappy, dissatisfied. How do I know that? Well, I know that in this way. This man, remember, is an Ethiopian. But I'm told that he had come to Jerusalem for to worship. What does that mean? Well, that tells me immediately that this man had become a proselyte Jew. He'd ceased to be a pagan, and he had taken up the Jews' religion, had become a proselyte. And so he had been up to Jerusalem and was now returning because he had been up to Jerusalem to worship God after the manner and the teaching of the Jews. Now this is a tremendous fact, and we must realize the significance of this. Here is a man brought up in paganism, a pagan by birth, brought up in a pagan culture and tradition and background. There is his position, but he's not happy, he's dissatisfied. And he had become so dissatisfied with it that he had forsaken it. And it had probably been done at considerable risk, but many had done it in that ancient world. And he had become a practicing Jew. Now the great question confronting us is this: why did he do this? He's not the only one who did it. I deliberately read to you at the beginning that section out of the 17th chapter of the book of the Acts of the Apostles, in order that I might give you the great illustration and example and teaching concerning this very matter. Because there, you see, we are shown exactly the same thing. The pagan world was a very big world. The Jews, this little nation, this little people, were a great exception in that ancient world. They were surrounded by pagans in different stages and degrees of paganism, from the most primitive to the most cultured and exalted, such as you found in Greece, in Athens, of all places, in the philosophers and the Stoics and the Epicureans. Well, now, here is a man, obviously, who can be compared very readily with those Athenians, because he's a man, as I say, of ability and understanding of knowledge and of training. And you see, what we are told about him is what we are told about those Athenians, that with all they had, they were dissatisfied. Did you notice that pregnant statement about the Athenians? We are told, for all the Athenians and the strangers that were there did nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Why were they always interested in something new? There's only one answer. They were not satisfied with what they had. The people are always rushing about the latest cult or the latest teaching. They're always betraying themselves and telling us that they're dissatisfied with what they've got, and so they were in Athens. There was this profound dissatisfaction, and these men shared it. In what respects were they dissatisfied? Well, there was obviously intellectual dissatisfaction. You see, this is the whole kind of philosophy, isn't it? They found themselves in this world, and they found it a world of contradictions and of problems and of difficulties, and they tried to understand it, tried to understand men, tried to understand life, tried to understand death, tried to understand history. And they grappled with their great minds with all these problems. They divided up into rival schools, but all together they couldn't arrive at it. It ended with a question. They were great at asking questions. Philosophers always are. The tragedy with the philosopher is that he can never answer them. He's very good at propounding them, and he can see the weakness in the other man's theory, but all end on the same level. They don't know. Intellectual dissatisfaction. And so when a strange teacher turned up, as Paul did on that occasion in Athens, they crowded round to hear him. What will this babbler say? They were traveling teachers. They went round, put up their standing, and then they began to speak, you see. And there they were listening. Has he got something new? What is this? This is strange. What is this new doctrine? This, oh, what a perfect description it is of this modern world. All the cleverness and the interest and the excitement, how intriguing, they say, and they rush from one to the other. Oh, why, let me say it again, your television gives you this almost every night, certainly 3 nights a week regularly, but almost every night of the week, this apparent interest and excitement about the new. It's a manifestation of intellectual bankruptcy. They don't know. So they rush after the latest teacher and the latest novelty. But not only was there intellectual dissatisfaction, there was moral dissatisfaction. There's men, like any intelligent men looking on at the life of the court, could see the utter superficiality of it all. The glamour and the glitter, and the supposed sophistication. What a farce it is, what a mask it is. They're not people. They put on the mask and the affectation. But all the sin that accompanied it, the dishonesty, the chicanery, this man, in his position, he saw it all, he knew it all. He knew the private accounts of so many of these people. And there he saw it, and he saw through it, and he was disgusted with it. And then when you saw it on the lower levels, the debauchery, the drunkenness, the sexual orgies, and all the foulness, the perversions, and everything. He saw it all. He knew all about it. I needn't keep you. It's all described in many notable passages in the New Testament. You needn't even go there. Read your newspapers, and there you'll find it. Look at your television. You'll see it. That was the life. He saw it, and he was disgusted. But yes, the question was still how to overcome it, how to get out of it. Oh, is there no rule? He said, is there no conduct? Is there no code? He was searching for something, for a liberating word. He was searching for moral power, moral dynamics, something that could stand between him and ever falling to the same sin. The man wanted moral liberation. He couldn't find it in all his pagan teaching and all the lore of the society in which he'd been brought up. And in the same way and beyond it all, there was a religious dissatisfaction. Because he was religious. Everybody's religious. There's no such thing as an irreligious person. Every man has a God and he worships him. See, this is the truth about religion. There's no such thing as an irreligious person. You know how in the ancient world they had all sorts of gods. Some, of course, believed there were spirits in trees and even in stones. Others worshipped the sun and the moon and the stars. Others had created gods for themselves, Baal and these various other gods. Jupiter, Mercurius, Mars, god of peace, god of war, god of love. As Paul tells those Athenians, he observed that they were too superstitious, which means, literally translated, too religious. He found Athens literally cluttered up with temples. And in these temples they worshipped their various gods. And they took their offerings and their sacrifices to them. Now, this man had been doing all this. We don't know exactly what kind of paganism he had and what kind of god he worshipped. But all we do know is this, that he'd seen through it all. He'd seen the vanity of it all. He knew these gods didn't exist, that they were mere figments of men's imaginations, that they had no reality, they had no power, they had no being, as those false gods that challenged and met Elijah, you remember, on the Mount Carmel in their hour of need. When they cried out unto their gods, there was no reply. There was dead silence. There is no Baal. There is no such thing. There is no idol. It's all the creation of man's mind and imagination. This man had seen through it all. The vanity of idolatry, the vanity of paganism. He was looking for a God worthy of his worship. You see, they were doing it in Athens. You remember that interesting and fascinating statement that's made in that 17th chapter of Acts? That Paul not only saw that they were too religious, but he was particularly attracted by this one temple. All the temples had got the name of the god over the doorpost. Jupiter, Mercurius, Mars, and so on. But here's the place, the unknown God. What does this mean? Oh, this is the attempt of the Greek philosophers to find the God that's at the back of all the gods. They knew it. They said, our gods are not adequate. They don't explain sufficiently. There is a God behind them all. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we may. There is a power over the powers, and they were seeking for him. If haply they might seek after him and find him, but they couldn't. That was exactly the position of this man. All he had didn't satisfy him, either intellectually, morally, or religiously. And so he had done something about it. And what he had done about it, as I've reminded you, is that he had become a Jew. He'd become a Jewish proselyte. He was, as I say, a man from Ethiopia, not a Jew. But he'd become a Jew. He'd taken this great step. Many had taken it about the same time. There were numbers of these Jewish proselytes at that very time. There were numbers of them in Egypt. It was for them in particular that the Old Testament had been translated into Greek in the Septuagint translation. These were pagans who had become Jews, that turned to the Jewish teaching and to the Jewish religion. This man had done that. What does this mean? Well, you see, this had meant a great transformation in his life. As I've told you, he's a serious man. He is a man who's concerned about his existence and about his life. And as to what the meaning of it all is, how is he going to meet death, what lies beyond, he wants to know. He can't get satisfaction. Here is a teaching which seems to him to be satisfactory. What is the teaching he's taken up? Well, it is the typical teaching of the Jews. The teaching, if you like, of the Old Testament. The teaching of the Jews at the time of John the Baptist and of our Lord. The teaching of the Jews that was still current at this very time in Jerusalem where he'd been visiting. He'd undergone a great change in the matter of his belief, therefore. And from believing in a multiplicity of gods, he now has come to see that there is only one true and living God. Here is the explanation he's been seeking. Here is the answer to the problem. What is the truth? Well, it is this great truth that is stated at the beginning of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created. There were theories about the origin of life in this time, remember. There's nothing new about that. These ancient philosophers had speculated a great deal with regard to the origin of life, even as people who believe the theory of evolution are still doing it today. They're just reverting to this old speculation and theorizing with regard to the explanation of these things. But the Jew was unique and separate. He said dogmatically he'd received a revelation. This was the thing about the Jew that differentiated him. The Jew was not a philosopher. The Greeks were the philosophers. The Jew didn't claim to be a philosopher. They were a simple people, an agricultural people. What made them unique? What made them unique was this. They said, we've got a revelation. We haven't thought it out. We haven't arrived at conclusions. We haven't been investigating and examining. God has spoken to us. We know nothing apart from what we have received. And their teaching was, therefore, that this true and living God had made the world and all that is in it. You see the very teaching that Paul expounded to those Athenians. He began by telling them, God dwelleth not in temples made with hands, you are God's due. They can be put even into a box because there's nothing there. But God can't be confined. Why? Well, he's made everything. And all things consist and subsist as the result of the word of his power. Not only that, they taught that this God was over all and who'd made everything, men included very especially, for him he'd made in his own image and likeness. And therefore this man has got a new conception of man, an exalted one, which links him in this way with the everlasting and true God. Furthermore, they went on to say that this great God had got a purpose and a plan with respect to life in this world. And that whatever men may have done, and they could review the history, this man was the sort of men who'd know the history, that whatever men might be doing, and governments and clashes and wars and cabinet changes and all the new arrangements, whatever men might do like that was ultimately irrelevant, that what really mattered was this great purpose of God. And the Jew was able to show this by taking people through his own history. He was forever telling people and reminding himself of how God had created him as a nation out of that one man, Abraham. And he'd done so because, as he said to Abraham, in thee and in thy seed shall all the nations of the world be blessed. At last, there is a light, there is a purpose. God is behind it all. God is bringing his great purposes to pass. This was the teaching. The Jews claimed a uniqueness. They said, we've got a message. Paul, you remember, putting it to the Romans in the 3rd chapter, puts it like this. He raises the question. He says, somebody says to him, if you, Paul, are saying that the Jew needs salvation as much as the Gentile, well, what advantage then has the Jew? Says Paul, much every way, because unto him was given the oracles of God. That's the Old Testament, the Word of God, this great light on God and his purpose. Now, this man had come to see this and to believe this. Not only that, you see, at last he has found, he thinks, the guidance that he needed in a moral respect. He wants to know how to live. Oh, the Greek philosophers had speculated, but it was a notorious fact that their lives were loose, they were dissolute. Sexual perversions were commonest amongst the philosophers. Even as suicide was to be found in a higher percentage and proportion amongst them than any other single section of society. Some of the most terrible things happened amongst them, even in their very temples. Those men, I say, had not only become dissatisfied, he longed for a way of life, he longed for a rule, for a law. At last he finds it. The law of God, this same God, this holy, just, righteous God, has given to the nation of Israel, the Jews, through Moses. He has got it, the 10 Commandments. The first table, the second table. Only one God. He alone is to be worshipped. Mustn't bow down to any graven image. Mustn't take the name of this God in vain. You must respect the day that he's appointed for himself. 1 in 7 is to be given to him. Second table. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, etc. Honor thy father and mother. Ah, says this man, this is the very thing I've been looking for. Here is morality, here is the way to live, here's holiness, here's justice, here's righteousness. He couldn't find it anywhere. At last he hears of it here, and he accepts it. He becomes a Jew. This is the way to live, keeping the 10 Commandments. So he had become a Jew. And likewise with regard to worship. He's seen through that other way, and at last he's told what he regards as the only true way. God has got to be worshipped by means of sacrifices. God has got to be approached with reverence and godly fear. You've got to have a priesthood and a high priest over them all. And there are rules and regulations. Lambs have got to be offered. Hands have got to be placed on the head of bullocks, and they've got to be killed. The blood's got to be taken. It's got to be sprinkled before an ark and presented to God. Burnt offerings, sacrifices, meal offerings. This is the only way to approach God. Men, the ordinary men, must stay in that outer court. The priests can go a little bit further to the holy place. Then there's a veil in the holiest of all, and only the high priest can enter, and even he only once a year, and he can't go in except with blood, and it's a momentous thing when he does. Will he come out, this holy God, this Shekinah glory that shines down upon it all? Here is the way of worship. And he recognizes it, and he submits to it. The priesthood and the sacrifices, the tabernacle and the temple, and all the ceremonial and the Jewish way of worship described in the Old Testament and in the New. And so he had taken up all this. He'd ceased to be a pagan, he'd become a Jew, and he was living with all his might this kind of life. Not eating certain types of meat, observing certain special days, certain festivals, submitting to the regulations, washing hands punctiliously when you come from the market before you sit down to eat, tithing mint and rue and anise and cumming, washing cups and pots and pans, 614 regulations, and doing his utmost to keep them and to carry them out punctiliously. That's what had happened to him. The man had ceased to be a pagan and had become a Jew. But I want to show you something further about him. He not only had taken this up in a kind of perfunctory manner, he had taken it up with great thoroughness. Have you observed the zeal of this man? He was a highly religious man. He didn't have his religion, as it were, just on Sunday or in a bag. No, this man's whole life was involved. This was the biggest thing in his whole existence. He was a highly religious man. I can give you proof of that. He'd gone up to Jerusalem. The events of 6 months ago should have put you right on your geography. If not, read it again, look up your atlases. It was a long journey, especially in those days, and a very hazardous journey. It involved a lot of absence from his work and from his office. Didn't matter, he must go there. You see, he wasn't satisfied even now. He wants further instruction. He wants further knowledge. There are authorities up there in Jerusalem which he can't find in Ethiopia. He wants to go to the headquarters. He wants to listen to the greatest Pharisee. Gamaliel was one of them, and Hillel was another. He says, if I can only listen to these, they'll give me something more. So he takes this hazardous and difficult journey in order to find yet something further, because though he's changed his religion and has taken this up with great thoroughness, still he's aware of further need. He hasn't found rest, he hasn't found peace. So he takes his journey up to a festival, a religious festival in Jerusalem. And on top of all that, he does another thing. He takes this vital step of buying a copy of a certain part of the Scriptures. He bought a copy of the book of the prophet Isaiah. You see, as I say, he was an able man and he was able to read. And he said to himself, well, of course, I haven't the advantage that people living in Jerusalem have of hearing these great authorities whenever I like, Sunday by Sunday on weekdays, and of going to them and putting my questions. I'll buy their very scriptures, the scriptures they expound. I'll read them for myself. I'll study them. You see, the man, he's taking it all so desperately seriously. He realizes the momentous character of these things. He wants the answer. He wants light. He wants knowledge. He wants peace. And so he takes these vital steps. And yet, you see the picture we are confronted with? It's that of a man in trouble. It's that of a man who's terribly burdened. The whole picture conveys that to us. Now the details are really very interesting and important here. He had deliberately chosen to go home by the desert road. I reminded you last Sunday night, many of you, most of you, perhaps, that there were two roads which he could have chosen to go home from Jerusalem. He deliberately chose the desert route. There was another route that didn't go through a desert way. He deliberately chooses the desert route. Why do you think he did that? I have no difficulty at all in answering the question. He wanted time to think. He was a big man and an important man. And if he'd gone on the other road, wherever he'd stopped to have a meal or to refresh himself, people would have come and have talked to him and have gossiped with him, asked his opinion on political questions and various other things, and he didn't want it. Others would have been anxious to entertain him and to make a fuss of him because of his greatness and his great position, would have considered it an honor to do so. He didn't want it. He didn't want the adulation of men. He didn't want their praise. He didn't want their conversation and their chit-chat. All of this to him was irrelevant and unimportant. Oh, the great question of the soul and of God and of eternity. He chooses the desert road to have peace and rest from all the noise and clatter and chatter of the world and its trivialities. Because he was in trouble. Because he's not at rest. Because in spite of visiting Jerusalem, he still hasn't got satisfaction. And I further see this in this extraordinary thing, that even while traveling in his chariot, he was reading the scriptures. Couldn't wait until he got home. Had to start at once. He's only just left Jerusalem. Doesn't matter. This is the burden. This is the problem. He's in an agony of soul. He's looking for something he can't find. He's changed his religion. He's got better things than he'd ever had before. But still, he can't find the rest and the peace. So he starts reading the scriptures he's bought even on the way home, traveling through the desert way. He's got more time to concentrate. And don't you see this trouble and this burdened condition? Even in his very voice and his accent, his tones, Philip runs to him and puts his famous question, "Understandest thou what thou readest?" And he said, "How can I, except some men guide me?" Do you hear the note of despair? Do you hear the note of hopelessness? The man's in real trouble. He's still seeking. He's still dissatisfied in spite of all that he has done. There's the position. Have I been dishonest in handling it? Can you show me my error? There isn't any. These are the sheer facts staring us in the face as we look at this man. But now I want to call your attention as I close to the tragedy of his position. The tragedy of this man, of course, was nothing but the tragedy of all the Jews who rejected the gospel. This is the great tragedy. Here's a man who's just been up to Jerusalem. And he goes home as hopeless as he was when he went up. Where's the tragedy? The tragedy is this. Something had already happened in Jerusalem, which had the full and the perfect and the complete answer to his every question and to his every need. But he hasn't heard it. In Jerusalem, just outside the wall of the city, the thing had happened which would give complete satisfaction. He knows nothing about it. That, I say, was the trouble with all the Jews. Had this man Now this is a bit of interesting speculation. Do you think he'd heard about the Lord Jesus Christ on his visit to Jerusalem? We don't know, but we can be fairly sure of this. As a Jewish proselyte, he would have turned in circles where if the name of Jesus had been mentioned at all, it was mentioned simply to be criticized, to be denounced, to be dismissed as a blasphemer, to be rejected. And he had undoubtedly accepted such teaching. And the result of this is that he goes back to his home as dejected and as troubled and as dissatisfied as he was when he left his home. What is this? Oh, my dear friend, this is just the tragedy of all people who are merely religious. It is one of the most perfect descriptions in the whole of the Scripture of the tragedy of the religious men. Now, what is it? Well, I'll put it to you in a few words. The Apostle Paul has said it all there in Romans 10. He says, look at my fellow countrymen. I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. They were most zealous, they were most keen, they were most punctilious. But he says it's not according to knowledge. They're in ignorance. They haven't got the light. The only thing that can give them satisfaction. Zeal without knowledge is the greatest waste of energy. It is sheer folly. And there, he says, they are trusting to their own righteousness. Listen to his great words. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God. What does he mean? Well, what he means is this. Here they are, he says, half killing themselves, with all their rules and regulations and offerings and sacrifices and hair cutting and sweating and all the rest that is involved. And they don't realize that it's all utterly useless. They going about to establish their own righteousness. Why do they do that? Because they are ignorant of the righteousness of God. This was the argument of the Jew. This was the position of this Ethiopian eunuch. This is the position of all religious people. They say, if only I say my prayers regularly, if only I go to church regularly, and of course if I go very early in the morning, it's so much better than the people who only go at 11 o'clock. If I don't do certain things, if I do good, if I evade certain sins, if I give a certain amount of money, if I do this, that, and the other, if I'm highly religious and zealous, then I will satisfy God. They going about to establish their own righteousness. And what a business it is, all expressed in this expression, going about, compassing hill and land and sea and hill and vale, doing all these things. But it's all utterly useless. They are ignorant of God's righteousness. What does God demand of us? Is your bit of religion and mine enough to satisfy God? Is your morality sufficient to put you in the presence of the holy and the absolute and the eternal? No, no. What does he demand? Well, the 10 Commandments have told you. You see, there is all the difference in the world between accepting the 10 Commandments with your mind and living them. Paul tells us that, doesn't he? He thought he was keeping the commandments perfectly, and then he understood the meaning of the word covet, and he suddenly found he'd never kept them at all. It isn't a matter of law, it isn't a matter of externalities, it isn't a matter of negativities. God says, here it is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and all thy soul, and all thy mind, and all thy strength. God demands absolute perfection, and if a man fails in one detail of the law, he's failed in it all. They didn't know that. And it was because they didn't know what God demanded in terms of righteousness that they were in their folly going about to establish their own righteousness. And it can't be done, and this poor Ethiopian has really discovered it. He's got new knowledge, he's got higher knowledge, but it doesn't put him right. He's failing, he can't do it. Not the hearers of the law, but the doers of the law are justified in God's sight. And so that brings us to the final tragedy of these people. This poor Ethiopian eunuch and all the Jews who thought as he now thought. Here is the supreme tragedy of this, that going about to establish their own righteousness and half killing themselves, they refuse the offer of God's righteousness in Jesus Christ, his Son. That's what this poor man was doing. That's what Philip went on to explain to him. And I hope to have the privilege of explaining it to you. All he was searching for was available. He didn't know it at this point. But there's a man just round the corner, a simple man called Philip, not a great man, not holding a high and exalted position, a mere nobody. He knows, he's got the answer. If the poor Ethiopian, he doesn't do it, he's in trouble, he's reading, he's trying to understand, and he can't. He's soulless in agony, he doesn't know. There's the answer. There's no need to ascend into the heaven, there's no need to go down into the depths. The word is nigh, even in thy mouth and in thine heart, if thou shalt believe on this Jesus. Justification by faith only. This blessed message that God has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Every man will perish apart from him. He is the only way of salvation. Man's righteousness is never enough. We need a righteousness from God, and God has provided it in his own Son, and he offers it us as a free gift. Here's the tragedy of the Ethiopian eunuch. He's been up to Jerusalem, but he hasn't met the Christian church. They've got everything he needs. Oh, but God is a God of love and of mercy and of compassion. And with all the effort and the striving and the journey of this man had not discovered, God sent to him by sending his servant with a simple, glorious message. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. The poor pagan is hopeless. The Jew, better position, is still hopeless. There is no difference between the Jew and the Gentile, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. My dear friend, the question for you is simply this. Have you got as far as this Ethiopian eunuch had got? Are you serious? Or are you dancing and waltzing and drinking and dragging your way through life? Have you seen the bigness of the possibilities? Have you considered the problem? Do you know there's a soul in you that's immortal? Have you faced it as this man faced it? This is the way. Have you come to this, I say? Have you done the things that this man has done? Even this isn't enough. But have you done anything? Have you realized your precarious position before the holy God before whom you'll have to stand? Do you know anything about eternal torment and the damnation of hell? How are you living? Are you ready to die? Are you ready to face God? Look at this man. Look at this story. Follow him. Emulate him. And and be as ready as he was to listen to the glorious message of salvation in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
We do hope that you've been helped by the preaching of Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones. All of the sermons contained within the MLJ Trust audio library are now available for free download. You may share the sermons or broadcast them. However, because of international copyright, please be advised that we are asking first that these sermons never be offered for sale by a third party. And second, that these sermons will not be edited in any way for length or to use as audio clips. You can find our contact information on our website at mljtrust.org. That's mljtrust.org.